Welcome to XpoNorth 2022 and this session, Indie Authors Working with Literary Agents. I'm Peter Erpeth, XpoNorth's resident advisor in the writing and publishing sectors, and I'm delighted to welcome to the conference two literary agents of true international standing, Amy Collins and John Jarrold. Before introducing them, what can you expect in this session? Well, industry innovation and timely exploration of key industry developments have long been running programme themes of the XpoNorth conference, and the conference has featured sessions on self-publishing and indie authorship since as early as 2008. And this session will explore ways in which agents and indie authors can and are working together. And of course, both John and Amy represent traditionally published authors as well as self-publishing authors, the theme of today. So our speakers today, it's my great privilege to welcome to XpoNorth and coming to us from the USA, Amy Collins. Amy is a literary agent with the Talcott Notch Literary Services Agency and has also spent 30 years in the publishing industry as a book buyer and sales director for a large non-fiction publisher. Amy is a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, as well as being an agent, and is a trusted expert, speaker and recommended publishing consultant. In her role, Amy focuses on non-fiction, history, historical fiction, fantasy and sci-fi. Amy is on the National Advisory Board of Ingram Spark, a member of Mensa and a columnist for Writers Digest. She has taught and spoken at many of the publishing industry's top festivals and conferences, including that of the Scottish Writers Association, our home turf, Publishers Weekly's BookCon, Oklahoma Writers Conference, the Rocky Mountain Writers Conference, Dublin Writers Conference, St Louis Writers Conference, Writers Digest, Las Vegas Writers Conference and many others, and it's a real privilege to bring Amy to XpoNorth this year. Now it's also
Peter, we have to cut that down. We've got
well, that's that. All of it is there. It's also a great pleasure to welcome back to XpoNorth a very old friend of the conference, John Jarrold. Now, between 1998 and 2002, John Jarrold ran 3 SF and fantasy imprints in London.
That's 1988 and 2002.
Sorry, 1988 2002. That's my typo. John Jarrold ran 3 SF and fantasy imprints in London publishing. Orbit, Legend at Random House UK and Earthlight at Simon & Schuster UK. In 2004 he started the John Jarrold Literary Agency, also specialising in SF, fantasy and horror fiction. From doyens of the field like Ramsey Campbell to many debut novelists, the agency has grown from a start-up to being a major presence in the genre and in international publishing. And well, what did Michael Moorcock say of him? He said, "Everyone I know who has worked with him has nothing but praise for him." I echo that totally. It is my pleasure to welcome John back to XpoNorth. So hi guys. I'd like to start this session by asking both to introduce the work of their agencies and in general, and to give us some insights as to when, how and why they first became involved in representing indie authors and what kind of representation they're now providing. And I'll hand over to Amy first.
Oh, Peter, thank you very much. It is such an honor to be here with you and with John. I'm pinching myself a little. I have been in the industry for, now I lie in my bio, I say 30 years, but it's been more than 30 years, I'm embarrassed to say. I have spent all of my career focusing on the market. We were joking earlier about how nobody wants me to edit their work. And the truth is, my focus has always been readers, what they're reading, what is selling, what is appealing to readers, what is shifting in the marketplace. I have found that over the years, you can stay relevant and stay successful in the publishing industry simply by paying very close attention to what is happening in the publishing industry. And so a big part of my day, every day, is not just reading newsletters and passively taking in the news, but chatting with people on the front lines, booksellers, librarians. Oh my gosh, librarians are a wealth. And so I spend a big part of my day not talking to authors, I do, of course, talk to my authors, but I spend a lot of time talking to booksellers and to librarians and to the people who fill the baskets that go out with flowers with a little Mother's Day book and with audio streaming systems and movie producers and everyone who works in books, to find out what they're looking for. Because I find, as I'm sure both of you do, that what readers want should always be my key focus. And because indie authors and self-published authors often are even closer, they often have their finger on the pulse and they're much closer to the front lines, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, compared to traditional authors, traditional publishers who are 3 or 4 people removed from those front lines. I find it fascinating to see the business people and the savvy business acumen coming out of self-published authors. Yes, a lot of my traditionally published authors have it as well, but I think it's more common in independent authors, and I find that so appealing, which is why I look there so often for new clients. And I would love to hear more about John. I'm fascinated by everything you've said about him.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful to deal with indie authors as well as traditionally published authors who want to be traditionally published. And again, every one of those indie authors is an individual. So I deal with someone like Bengali, who has been a successful indie author for a decade. And exactly that, understands the market, understands what his readers want. With a corporate publisher, and it depends on the individual, because again, no absolutes, it can be turning an ocean liner around. It can take a while for them to work out something that they need to change. With an indie author, especially like Ben, who realizes that 50% of the time you're not writing, you're dealing with everything else, they can move quickly with that. Again, Rob Hayes, another of the indie authors I deal with. Now, in both of those cases, they came to me because they're interested in a hybrid model. They're also interested in selling rights outside English. So I can deal with both of those things. I can talk to mainstream publishers. I can also advise them on the other side of things. So it's very much a sort of what fits that individual with me. Some authors have said, right, I want to stay self-published, but I want you to deal with my translation rights. Absolutely fine. First thing, of course, is I have to love the book. I have to love the writing. Without that, nothing else matters. First, I worked in publishing in January 1988. My boss said to me, if you've got any doubts about the book, any doubts at all, say no. Because it means I'm not the right person. And another agent, another publisher will be the right person. And it's so difficult to get a book or an author taken seriously that you need that deep enthusiasm to be able to share it with other people. I have other authors who definitely want to be mainstream published, and that's fine. That's what I do as well. And because of the background in publishing, I've got an idea of what's going on. One of the changes I've seen in the last 2 years is a lot of mainstream science fiction and fantasy publishers saying, we're really interested in what can cross over to mainstream and YA. We don't necessarily want to see what we would have said was a traditional science fiction or fantasy novel 5 years ago. So that's changing. Not for everybody again, but for several major publishers. So every day is different, which makes it absolutely fascinating. And I entirely agree. I was actually a public librarian for 15 years before I started working in publishing. So I've worked with books since September 1972. And yes, being on the front of that, seeing what the public wanted for 15 years, really useful. So I go into my local libraries. I still talk to people at Waterstones, W.H. Smiths, and other places in the UK to find out what they're seeing changing. Because it's always the changes that are interesting, that you don't want to do what you did 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I was lucky enough to be the first UK publisher of Robert Jordan's Eye of the World and that series, The Wheel of Time. That was 1988. So things have changed since then. 10 years before that, every epic fantasy was elves and dwarves. That changed. Everything changes, which is a huge pleasure. One of the major changes is that in corporate publishing now, if a book is turned down by that publisher, that imprint, you can't send it to a different editor at that imprint later on. Now, Carol Blake, who was Diana Gabaldon's agent, told me that she'd sent out Outlander 34 times before she got a deal. And it was the 4th editor at that individual company that got the deal. You can't do that anymore with a lot of companies because corporate hand says, no, we've turned it down. We don't want to do it again. So changes, always changes. always every day different, always fun to do this. And I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does very much so, John. Yeah. Just, Amy, can I ask you how you kind of first got into this then? When, what was the kind of, who's the first indie author that you kind of represented or maybe even approached you? I mean, what was the kind of move into this? What did that look like?
I approached them. For 15 years, I owned a book distribution company, and my job, I worked with nothing but small presses, medium-sized presses, and quite a few independent authors who had launched their own press. However, they were the only author in the press. And so I knew the industry, and I knew a lot of authors, and I was speaking at a lot of conferences. I sold that company a few years ago and retired. I was so bored. Within 3 months, I was pulling my own hair out.
Yeah.
And I was approached by a dear friend who was an agent who said, you might enjoy this. This might be fun. And she was right. So there I was. I decided that I was going to use my market knowledge. And the first call I made was to a woman named Nicole Evelina. Now, Nicole was a USA Today best-selling author, which may probably not mean a lot over in Scotland. But here, if you can stay on the USA Today bestseller list for 6 or more weeks, that's usually the tip. Lots of people get on it for a week, but for me, if you stay on for 6 weeks or longer, you are an author that has some legs. And I had known Nicole for years. I'd admired her. I knew her around the conference circuit. I called her, and she had self-published all of her books. She had a Guinevere series that I absolutely adored. It's the kind of stuff I read. She did a lot of speculative fiction. She did a lot of what John was talking about, historical fiction with a touch of magic.
Yeah.
A touch of fantasy, which is I just had a call with Ann G from Random House here in the US, who said that romance with a touch of magic is the biggest thing she's looking for right now. So Nicole this was 2-3 years ago. She was ahead of the curve. I loved her stuff. I asked her if I could be her agent. She did not come to me. I begged her. She was my very first client, and we've signed 4 deals together in the last 2 years so far. And she is by far my most prolific and successful author. She's not the one I've had the biggest deals for, but the most consistent deals for. And I got into agenting after 30 years working in the publishing industry, and after being a book buyer was extremely helpful. And so indie authors, I know how hard they work. I know how ambitious they are and how willing they are to hustle. I have never met an indie author who says, I just want to write. I don't want to do any of the marketing. A successful indie author who says, I don't want to pay attention to social media. I just want to write my book. And that's one of the things I love about them. So I have a lot of traditionally published authors, but I would say at least half my list right now is a mix of both.
Well, yeah. What about you, John? What was your kind of, were you first approached by an indie author and that came as a surprise, or did you have your eye on this space for a while?
There are 2 prongs to that. One is an author like Tim Hardy, who's just been shortlisted for the self-published fantasy blog off, the annual one that best-selling author Mark Lawrence does. That series originally we did want to sell to mainstream publishing, and we got some nice responses, but we didn't get an offer. So Tim and I had a long conversation. He decided to self-publish, and it's going well. The other end is the Ben Gallies and the Rob Hayes, who have already been there. And they both came to me to discuss possibilities in the first place. 10 years ago, I would have said it was much more difficult for indie authors to be taken seriously. Now it's absolutely as viable as mainstream publishing. As long as Amy says, as long as you take it seriously, as long as it's a business, it isn't just, I'm going to write my book and chuck it out there. Because if you do that, you'll sell 100 copies if you're lucky. So it's all about all the things that a publisher has to do, but also that speed of thought that you can do as an indie author that sometimes is difficult for a publisher trying to change the course of that ocean liner. So it is very much, again, it's not a one size fits all thing. is about dealing with individuals. But certainly, after the last 3-4 years, it's an area that is far more interesting. It has to be what works for the author.
Yeah.
If an author wants an agent, then I'm here. If an author wants to be an indie author on their own, that's up to them. If they want a few questions, that's fine. So again, it's whatever works for the individual author.
And can we just talk a little bit about the kind of rights that you're representing and what are the complexities of that? Because obviously, by definition, the indie author has already got something on the digital bookshelves, if not the physical bookshelves as well. What's the kind of rights landscape here?
It can be an audio deal. I just did a full book audio deal with Bengali with Audible. If an indie author already has an audio deal, it's unlikely that if they're interested in a mainstream deal, that they will get one. Because in the same way that when I was in publishing, ebooks became a part of the contract that was a red line, now audio rights are, with most mainstream publishers, with the corporate side of things. If you can't sell them audio rights, they're not interested. So audio rights, they are usually dealing with paperback and ebook rights. Translation rights, obviously, is one of the main things that I deal with around the world. Mm-hmm. So we've done deals recently in Russia, strangely enough, and in Brazil and in France and elsewhere. So again, it's what you're doing for that individual author. And you always have the conversation with the author. You don't tell them things, you talk to them about things. And then you explain hopefully with your knowledge of what you feel is the right way to do it. But you discuss, you always discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, what about you, Amy? What's the kind of rights situation for you and your authors? And I must say as well that I know that you also that you represent a very dear friend of XpoNorth, Orna Ross, who's done a lot of work with us over the years.
Well, in many cases, I echo John's comment. Now, for an author like Orna, there are quite a few authors out there that have no interest in selling their print rights, their ebook rights, or their audio rights. And that puts me in a bit of a bind because that does not leave a lot. I had a woman, I'm just going to use her first name, Lynn, who came to me. She had self-published, hardcover, paperback, ebook was out, audio was out. She'd sold rights for 4 different languages. She'd sold French, Spanish, Russian, German, and she wanted me to take her on as a client and sell the rest. And there was not enough juice left in the orange. To be honest, I have to be, as much as I'd love to be of service, there's a lot of work that goes into selling foreign language rights. A lot. It's in many cases, it's much harder than pitching, especially for novels and memoir, which I kind of lump together. Nonfiction's a little different. So to answer your question a little more clearly, instead of wandering off like I just did, a lot of the same rights that John just mentioned, but I focus a lot on audio, but also on audio streaming. There are companies out there like Serial Box is now called Realm, and there's Chirp. There's a number of companies that actually will buy a book's rights and chop it up into 10, 12, 22 shorter episodes. And people buy subscriptions, and the author publisher gets paid by the number of listens. And I have found that to be extremely exciting. So quite often, actually in all cases, when I am working with a publisher, I will allow them the unabridged audio rights, but I never, ever, if I can get away, they're going to pay me for the serial audio rights. They're going to pay me for the abridged audio rights. I pull those out separately because those are gold right now. There's a company called Orange Sky that is an imprint that was created 2.5 years ago by Findaway Books, and Findaway is the sister company to Draft to Digital, which a lot of independents use. And they're starting their own, speaking of libraries, they're starting their own production company. They will ship libraries, these little pucks that are fully loaded with audiobooks that people can check out if they're not comfortable with downloads. There's so much happening you can sell rights for. So negotiating contracts now for my independent clients is a little more complicated than it used to be. Yes, foreign rights, but also movie rights. And not just movie rights, You can now separate book to film is different from screenplay rights, is different from streaming rights. There's so much that goes into it. So I gotta tell you, a big part of my job now is contract negotiation, which is hysterical when you think that I'm an opera major with an English degree. So I have a lawyer and several publishing buddies that I keep on retainer. I pay them monthly to help me review all these contracts, because it takes a village to keep a contract the way it should be. I hope that answers your question. I feel like I just meandered a bit.
No, it very much doesn't. And just to one side, of course, audio is a major element of all of this now, as we're, as clear from the discussion so far, but there's complications in that space, and also some opening, I think. I think, at the time when Audible came online, there were authors actually signing quite long contracts, making quite long commitments, which, indie authors and others kind of, tied into almost like a traditional book contract, but on the audio side now. And some of these other things you're talking about are you can self audio to place and so on. Are you finding that the audio market itself, for traditional and self-publishing authors, the original rights in all of this, is opening up a little bit? Are you finding there's changes there? It sounds like there's positive things happening, as it were, for the author in terms of the rights relationship to all of that and the rights of their, the audio rights in their work.
Amy?
Well, yes, I am finding that it is easier, in many cases, even easier than ebooks, to find new readers in the audiobook market if you distribute yourself properly and if you market yourself properly. But audiobook and audiobook listeners, they eat content. They're constantly looking for new things. And if you can smartly not align yourself exclusively just with Audible, that is my advice, is to go wide. I do not believe in a Audible only for independent authors deal, for this reason. You only get 2 credits a month, and then and I want more people reading my book than that. So there's Chirp, there's so many companies out there that you can distribute your audiobook to, and then to make your book extremely affordable, and then spend a little, not a lot, but a little bit of money making sure that you're being recommended. If you liked Robert Jordan, then you would like if you love Glennon Doyle, then you have to listen to. It's easier to get those recommendations in the audiobook market at the moment than ebooks, because truly well-produced audiobooks are not cheap, and there are fewer well-done audiobooks than there are well-done ebooks. The audiobook, again, I'm only speaking for the US, but according to the Book Industry Study Group, the audiobook market is responsible for almost 30% of the income of our industry over here last year. Almost 30%.
Yeah.
And ebooks are only about 14%. So everyone focuses on ebooks because they're easier. But a really well-done audiobook that's been distributed properly, and you spend just a little bit of time marketing, it's so much easier to find new readers. It's so much easier to bump into somebody's awareness and into their either their inbox and so I have found that audiobooks are for traditionally published authors, corporate authors, as well as hybrid and independent, my favorite way to have them spend their marketing money. And it's one of the ways that I suggest they start their focus, even more so than print. John?
Yeah, entirely agree. Audible obviously are starting to act almost like a corporate publisher, and you really need to spread out from that. So in this country, we have various other ones, including W.F. Howes, who I knew as a large print publisher when I worked in libraries. So they've diversified into audiobooks. And I think it's very important that if a self-published author, an independent author, comes to you and says, can we go for Audible? You explain all the possibilities. You don't just say, oh, yes, of course, I know people at Audible, we'll talk to them. If they still want to talk to Audible, then of course we will do that. But I would certainly want to go through all the possibilities first, and spread out. Exactly that, as it was with ebooks several years ago. Now it's audio that's so important, and you have to explain that to every author. And when you're doing a deal with a mainstream publisher, you have to make a point that it ain't what it was. I have a contracts associate, and we go through every contract. Obviously, when I have a contract with Random House or Hachette, whoever, there will be a boilerplate, future contracts. But you have to be aware that there are changes, and changes don't just come on the publisher's side. They come on this side as well. So you have to say, but what about? This is okay. I mean, there are a lot of people in the contracts departments who I knew when I was working in publishing. So we can understand, we've both got scars from those days, and deal with it sensibly. But you have to ask the questions. I mean, one of the major points of being an agent is asking questions. And asking questions that the author doesn't know need to be asked. That is so important. I'm aware how difficult an editor's job is. I'm also aware of what they should be doing. And if they're not doing it, I will say, well, why aren't you doing it? And you should be doing it. And this is what you need to do. The same thing with the rights department, the same thing with the contract department. So you have to have all of those strings to your bow as you are discussing a contract. And yeah, Audible is incredibly important, and I think will become more and more important.
Yeah, it's very interesting, all of that change, isn't it? It seems to have come very quickly. I mean, I remember when XpoNorth, back in the day when it was known as Go North, and we started talking about digital books and so on, all of the stuff we did in the conference rooms when it was a physical conference was actually really fundamentally how-tos. How do you make an ebook? And yet here we are today. That is perhaps too
second
easy.
nature.
It's it's a print option in most word processing packages these days, and audio seems to be, just of emerged so quickly. I mean, I'm a big audio listener myself, but I'm also a published author whose enduring rights in all future media are tied up in a contract I signed for not very much money when I was quite young, just want to kind of change tack and look at this from the other side a little bit more as well. We've got onto the sort of things in this for the writer. If I was an indie author, what would you recommend as being the kind of fundamentals in my approach to you? I've got this work. How do I prepare myself to? They might be watching this, and I'm thinking, I've got self-published this book. It's an ebook on Amazon and maybe other places. I'm thinking about getting an agent. How do I do that? What are the nuts and bolts? What are the considerations I need to put together in making, as it were, my pitch, in making that approach?
John?
Okay, well, the first thing I would say is look at agents' websites and do what it says. Explain yourself as an indie author. Explain what you want, whether you want to remain an indie author, whether you want to be a hybrid author, whether you're interested in mainstream publication, why you are approaching the agent. Because again, everybody will have their own take on why they want an agent or why they don't want an agent. So that's the basic thing, because that's the beginning of the conversation. Why do you want an agent? And then, yes, I need to see the pages, the prose, because again, if the prose doesn't fire me, I don't care if you sold 5 million copies, I'm not going to be interested. Okay. I'm not the right agent. And I've turned down people who've sold a lot of copies and explained exactly that. I can't deal with it purely and simply as a business. It has to be something that fires me personally as well. But the basic thing is, think about what you're doing, think about what it says on the agent's website, and think about what they have done. Look at the authors with whom they work. See if that's something that you feel works for you.
Do you think authors in that situation have to kind of come to you and say, these are the rights, to have that kind of level of awareness about what they want to do? Or is it something that you would say, well, come to, you've got this good work professionally published, we can explore the rights issues together?
I think what Amy said earlier is very important about the author Lynn, that it's no good coming to an agent when almost all your rights are already tied up. That you need to think ahead, you need to strategize, basically. It isn't tactics, it's strategy. You need to be thinking about your career, not just one book. So if you can have all of that in your head, and that's what a successful author of any type is, it isn't just one book, then that helps. Amy, over to you.
Well, no, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I love this question. This is probably my favorite question to be asked, because so few authors approach me, I would say, properly. But you know what? The definition of properly is the way I want. And it's different for every agent. Let me just tell you the difference. Now, I'm going to say something which means John and I will never be friends. And it makes me sad because I've just met him. But I have many clients. I have several clients whose books I would not personally read, because I do get fired up about money and about success and about especially women's success. And I'm very focused on marginalized voices, as I know John is. I've seen his list.
Yeah.
Helping an author that I feel passionate about, even if I'm not passionate about their book. And I want to give you an example. One of my largest deals last year was a book about Sesame Street. I have no children. I don't even like kids. I avoid them on the street. There's no reason why I should be representing a book about Sesame Street, a beloved children's show. But I did very well for that author. And so when someone approaches me and I say no thank you, or they approach John and say I'm not a good fit, please do not be discouraged. It means that John was not excited about your prose and I was not excited about your platform. And the third author will be excited about both. See, for me, it's not so much about one book. I look for authors that I think have a long career ahead of them. Yes, I retired a few years ago and then changed my mind, but I'm still young enough that I would like to be doing this for 10, 12 years and signing an author who has one book in them that it took them 15 years to write, and then they self-published and now want me to sell that self-published book to a corporate or a traditional publisher. That's not going to work.
No.
I'm looking to help someone build their career. And so when you ask what I'm looking for and how to approach me, for me, approach it like a business.
Yeah.
Go to my website, as John said. Absolutely. Find out that I ride motorcycles. You want to slip that in your query package? That's great. But you want to know what really gets my attention? The fact that you are a member of whatever genre you write in, that you're a member of many agencies and organizations that focus on that genre. Are you a member of your community, of your genre community? Are you aware of current and best-selling titles in your genre? Is your book, does it have proof of concept? Does it have market viability? And show me in your query letter that you know what market viability looks like, and I will bend over backwards to be your agent, even if I think I'm full up, even if I'm closed to queries. You send me something like that, I have quite often violated my own rules just because an author knocked my socks off with their business acumen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I always say in my guidelines is, tell me 3 recent books that you think yours could be compared with. You still get the one that says, oh, well, Terry Pratchett or Isaac Asimov. And you explain
Name of the Wind, Patrick Rothfuss.
Oh, of course, yes. And indeed Robert Jordan. But you've got to explain to people that it's about the last 3 to 5 years of a genre. That's all the book trade are interested in. And if the publisher, and if this is for people who want to be mainstream published, if the publisher can't relate that to the book trade, they may not be able to sell the book to the book trade. It's no good saying, oh, well, I want to do humorous fantasy like Terry Pratchett did, when actually that stopped selling in the UK in the late 1990s. Yeah. By which time I was talking to the head buyer at W.H. Smith's, not the head SF buyer, but the head buyer at W.H. Smith's, who said to me, we no longer see a humorous fantasy market in terms of sales. We see a Terry Pratchett market. Yes. So that's it. You have to be aware of that. So market awareness is so important. Don't write purely and simply for the market, but be aware it's there. Very, very important.
Yeah.
If you've got a plucky heroine who's fighting the Nazis, right now, put that book in a drawer. It's not going to go anywhere. Write your next book. So when you are approaching an agent, or even if you're approaching an editor during open submission periods and you're trying to get a publishing deal, what John said about comparable titles, give me 3 titles that are, you know, the question I ask the same question, but a little differently. I say, what books do the readers that you want, what books do they have sitting on their to be read pile right now? Because it's not about books that are like yours. I know there's no books like yours. I get it. Your book is unique. There's no other books out there like it. If you say that to an agent, you might as well just throw yourself in the no pile.
Yeah.
But the question is, what author's readership do you want to share? The answer can't be Stephen King, and it can't be Terry Pratchett, because they are icons.
Yeah.
You're looking for successful authors, not iconic authors. So when you're looking for these comparable titles, you're looking for successful authors that are only a few years old, perhaps recent debut authors, because you're a debut author. You want an apples to apples comparison. And if you say, well, I'm very similar to Stephen King, I can say, well, that's great. I look just like Adele. That's not helpful. So what I'm begging you guys is to ask yourself, whose readership do you want to read your book? Are they current? And are they iconic, or are they simply successful? And how do you know if they're successful? Here in the United States, the rule I use, go on Amazon, and if they have more than 5,000 reviews, that is a successful author. But if they've been publishing, if they've got 20 novels, they're probably a phenomenon, and that's not a good comp. Sorry to take that over, but I wanted to talk about comp titles a little.
I could not agree more on every level there. And basically, it is about debuts for the last 3 and 5 years that are successful, not critically successful, but commercially successful, that are out there, and you can look at that, you can research that, as you say, and that's what you want. So it's, no, I know you're not writing the same as X, but is that your catchment area? Is that your general catchment area? And if you can give me 2 or 3 names like that, then I've got an idea that A, that you know what you're talking about, and B, that I know the area you're looking at. And I might say absolutely that, but I will also add, well, that name, because again, that's part of my value added stuff. It's so important. I get every week somebody say, oh, well, I haven't actually read any science fiction or fantasy for 30 years, but I'm just writing this novel. And I'm thinking, well, why? Why? You know, if you want to write it and give it to your children and your friends, that's delightful. What has that got to do with commercial publication? You know, so it's a business. Of course, it's a business. The clue is in the world commercial publishing. You're not in it for the good of your health as a publisher. You're in it to make money, and you make money by publishing books that the public want to read. So you need to be aware of where the market is in 2022, not where it was even in 2015. That's a different market. Yeah. Where is it today? Be on the cutting edge. Write fantasy that's been written in the same area that's been written in the last 5-6 years. Write SF in the same area. Write any area of fiction that you're writing that's in that catchment area. Yeah. The huge pleasure of every area of commercial fiction is that they are wide. You can write. You don't have to write exactly like this person, but you must be aware that we ain't in 2015, we ain't in 2000, we ain't in 1980. Here we are, 2022. What's out there now that makes you go, yes? Because that's the reaction you want from your readers. I'm sorry, I'm using my hands. First thing I was ever told was, when you're doing talks or anything like that, never use your hands. Oh, that's rubbish. I think it's hugely useful for the enthusiasm to come through that way.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. Can I just say, over the years, of course, things have changed with self-publishing, indie authorship and so on. Although sometimes I wonder, do you, as agents, experience any kind of negativity or trouble in selling the rights that you are representing if it is known to the potential purchaser of those rights that it originated in self-publishing or an indie authorship? Or is that kind of stigma invisible? So if you're selling audio rights to you're selling to Audible for the rights of a self-published order, are they less inclined to take that on?
Sales will matter, but sales will also matter with a traditionally published author if they're going to Audible. So if there isn't that visibility, they won't be interested. Amy, I'm sorry, over to you.
No, I completely agree. I know that there are scouting agencies now sprouting up all over the world whose entire job, they literally have job descriptions where they will hire an entire person. Their only job is to go through self-published authors and look them up on BookScan. There are companies such as Sourcebooks here in the States that one of the jobs of the editorial assistants is they are simply to look for self-published authors that might have potential. I would say that it is a golden age for independently and self-published authors.
Wow.
With the correct expectations and with the correct sales. If you are a self-published author with 2 or 3 books out there and none of them have sold more than 200 copies, you are seriously jeopardizing a future deal with a publisher, because you have proven to a publisher that perhaps you can't sell a book. And it is far more damaging for nonfiction than it is fiction. I can make the argument with a new manuscript from a self-published author that they never had the distribution or marketing assistance that perhaps Angry Robot or someone can give them now. Because there are companies out there being distributed by Random House. So I can make that argument, but for a nonfiction author, it's tough. So be very careful if you're going to self-publish. And if you have dreams of future traditional or commercial publishing, you'd better knock those first few books out of the park, because they will look at those sales. So no, they're not discouraged by the name self-published or independent author, but they will quite often get discouraged by the success or lack thereof.
One of the things I'm finding now is almost every week I will get a submission from somebody who wants mainstream publication but says, oh, I've put this on Amazon 6 months ago to see if it would work, and I've sold 250 copies. Well, you've killed that book. I said, as far as I'm concerned, what a mainstream publisher will now want to see is a new book from you, and not the second book in this series, a new series. That series is now dead. Forget it.
Yeah, it's
because you've sold the 250 copies that you were going to sell, and it's done.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry, Peter.
Not a problem. I often find, I get a lot of those encounters of, somebody's worked in writing development for sort of 20 years or so on. I get a lot of first, initial and frontline contact from people with self-published books, and I find it just a form of tragedy, really. Sometimes and when you look at the book and you think, well, as I said, the problem here is that the professionalism required in this hasn't been followed through at every stage. Then often it's the editing. They're not edited properly. They're not, they haven't been developed before the send button was pushed in the way that they need to be developed, in the depth and professionalism that needs to be in that. And you're dead right. It's too late. The amount of people who I come across who come to me with a problem, which is that they've got a loft full of books that they can't sell. Yeah. And it's, the answer is very, very rarely a positive one or a nice one. So, just rewinding a little bit all the way back to the beginning of being an author here. And if you're going to self-publish, you're going to be an indie author. This is a very, very tough professional gig. But it can be done professionally. And it has to be done.
You have to do everything that a mainstream publisher does.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to do
and
that,
to the same levels.
Exactly. If you're not willing to do
what
that.
What breaks my heart is that this is also a creative and artistic endeavor, but it takes so much more time. If they were a watercolorist and they were developing their craft, they could paint 400 watercolors in the same amount of time that they could come up with one manuscript. Yeah. And they could develop their craft, and they could learn, and they could shift, and they could constantly be changing. If they were songwriters, I'm a musician on the weekends, and I'm here to tell you, it doesn't. No matter what I think, it does not take as long to write a song as it does to write a book. Yeah. But when you've spent all that time writing a book, and then you're investing money in the editorial process, a watercolorist does not have to pay someone $3,000 to go through their watercolor and start making red marks. Yes, they have to invest in classes and coach. Everyone needs to work on their craft. But because this is such a time investment, for the love of Pete, I am begging all of you listening, do not rush it. Do not throw it out. Do not rush to publication. You don't have 400 watercolors in you. This is your baby, and make sure that you don't blow your chance.
Yeah. One of the main things I've said to publishers, to authors over 30 years is, it's not about getting it fast, it's about getting it right. And that is so true. Take your time, strategize, as I said earlier, think about it, sit down and think. Don't just sit at the keyboard and go, right, done.
Yeah.
Everything has to be thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so interesting and but so important as well, because there are, of course, also still out there, vanity publishing still exists. There are companies that are prepared to take a lot of money off of people.
More and more.
yeah, to deliver all sorts of author or editorial services and marketing and all the rest of it. And you really have to look at that with go into that with your eyes open and take advice about these things, because the sorts of opportunities that you guys are talking about get further away if you get that wrong. They might be gone forever. And it's certainly not, trying to get back into the traditional trade. There is no trap door out of this problem.
No.
You can't.
And a lot of those vanity publishers will come back to you within 24 hours and say, this is the best book we've ever read. We want to publish it. Well, it only cost you $1,500 because, of course, you have to pay for the artwork or you have to pay for the editing. The money flows one way. Yeah. It flows from the publisher to the author.
Yeah.
And you don't even end up with a book at the end of the day. You end up with a book-shaped object.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even a real book.
Yep.
I mean, I'd give someone $2, $3, $4 if I could get a book out of it. If my aunt wrote a story about her grandmother who, traveled to Oregon in the 1920s, and she just wanted, great, fine. Everyone deserves to make money, but you don't even end up with a real book.
No.
Yeah.
There is a great website called Writer Beware. Everybody should look at that, see what they say about individual companies. I've had authors come to me and say, well, I've had 3 books published by X. I said, no, you haven't. You've had 3 books that they've made you pay money for, that you've probably seen 3 copies which have gone to your family. No copy has ever been in a bookshop. No copy has ever been on Amazon. No copy has ever been anywhere where the public can see it. But this cost you thousands of dollars. So forget it.
Yeah.
That's completely dead.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to talk about publishing, we'll talk about publishing. That isn't publishing.
That's printing.
Yeah. One other kind of related issue to this, Amy, and I know you've been a little bit active in this, is the rights, book related audio rights and so on, of people who maybe come into this via kind of social media channels such as YouTube or Insta and so on. And I know that you've been active in terms of representation in that field, which is kind of allied to what we're talking about, really, in that the literary agent is an expanding concept these days, isn't it? What's been your experience there?
Well, and I've stumbled into it because I am highly addicted to social media. I spend a lot of time on Instagram. I love TikTok. I love the videos. I'll sit there and scroll my phone. Okay. And so I have stumbled across some, in my case, it's been women at this point, and although for no other reason other than it just is coincidence, a couple of women who have now gotten some nice publishing deals simply by just being really charming on Instagram or TikTok. I have met a couple of clients on Twitter, but what I'm finding is that these women, or I should say these people, have a particular voice. And their voice and their tone and their message is very appealing to 500,000, 750,000, 1.2 million people. And that's very appealing to me because those are numbers. Now, most of them can't write. Most of them can't write. They've got a wonderful voice. They speak beautifully. They produce beautiful videos, but they couldn't write a grocery list. And so there's one of 2 ways to go. I approach them. I ask them if they're interested in a book because their message to me seems full. There's a woman named Devery Donaldson on TikTok who has these very feminist, empowering messages. And she's got a variety of tones and a variety of messages. That appealed to me. I'm not interested in the people who are one-trick Charlies, who are just online saying the same thing over and over again. But she had a variety of tone, a variety of messages. And here's the thing. When I asked her if she wanted to write, she had an MFA in writing and she sent me sample essays. The woman could write. 5 weeks later, she had a very nice deal with Blackstone, not just in audio, but the reason why I went to Blackstone is that I wanted her to have a huge audio presence. I want her audience is used to listening to her, and I wanted her to have the right to record her audio. I wanted a company that could train her properly, and I knew that Blackstone was a good idea. So you fit the social media star with the fact. I'm almost done with my story. I'm so sorry, but conversely, there are also people that I meet who have an amazing story And as I said, they can't write. So I partner them with other authors. And I say, hey, you two should have a 50-50 or a 70-30 or a 60-50 deal, not ghostwriting, although I love ghostwriters, but you should be, so-and-so author and so-and-so author, or so-and-so as told to. And why don't you work out a deal where your story which is amazing, is written by this writer who is amazing. So not everyone should write a book, especially nonfiction authors. Lots of times it just needs to be a podcast or a white paper.
Yep.
It's not worth a whole book. But in many cases it is, and you shouldn't be the one to write it. I'm sorry to say. And that's my job as an agent, is to help you get your message out there. And with that, I'd love to hear what John has to say.
Yeah, I get more and more. I get lots of every week submissions, more and more saying, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm doing this. I started as a writer, I'm now doing the TikTok, and my latest got 1.3 million views. I'm not going to be interested in this unless I like the prose. But when I am interested, then I will be interested. So there's somebody out at the moment, Bronte Marie Weston, who's Australian, and her latest, she said to me this week, oh, by the way, my latest thing on TikTok got 1.3 million views. Is that useful for you to know? I said, oh yeah. So that her book is out with publishers at the moment. I've been able to go to them and say this, as well as giving them all the background when I sent the book out. So again, it's another area of the market that wasn't there 5-10 years ago, that you can make people aware of, because people are interested in what she's saying in different areas, not just saying one thing all the time. And she's interested in the genre of fantasy writing. So she's got that string to her bow as well. And she's a bookseller. And damn it, she's being called an influencer in places not by me or her, but by others. So all of those things are really useful. And you want that extra hook, because a publisher will see maybe 40 novels in the week, 40 debut novels, and take on 2 a year. I mean, that's the average. That's what I was doing when I was a publisher.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the mainstream side of things, it's that. If you're looking at the indie side of things, it's another way of getting your books out there to the public.
Yeah. What blows the mind of the social media stars, however, is how slow publishing works. I represent Stacey McEwen, another Aussie. So I mean, they're brilliant. And the thing that got Stacey the contract, and this was with the Angry Robot, was not her. I mean, her TikTok views were appealing, but her writing was brilliant. I mean, she wrote a fantasy story. It had a unique hook, which is so hard to find in fantasy. She had an extremely unlikable female character, which I just adored. Yeah. She had it all going on. But here's the thing. It took 1 year from when I got her the deal until her book came out. And in her mind, that was unacceptable. That was absolutely a year. And when I want to tell her that that's the fastest I've ever worked. I mean, I worked a deal for her in 5 weeks. Yeah. And her book is coming out within 11 and a half months. And to her, that is ridiculously long, because she's an independent businesswoman in the social media realm. And I want to tell her that's the fastest I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I mean, if I did a deal tomorrow, the earliest it would be out is June 2023, because publishers have schedules, and your book has to sit into the schedule, because you ain't the only fish in the sea. You know, you need a good place so that you get your place in the sun, and B, you need to fit in the schedule. That's a part of the game. And I mean, I've had deals where it's been 18 months after publication. I've explained to the authors always how it works before a book is sent out, so they know that whenever we do a deal, it will be 12 to 18 months. And they've got to either accept that, or they can go into self-publishing if they want to, you know. But don't tell me if it ain't within 6 months, I don't want it, because in that case, you won't get it.
Yeah. Doesn't happen like that. I mean, I think a lot of these particularly these types of cases, conversely, I think they really do prove the case for self-publishing. I mean, I worked with someone recently who's got a good solid YouTube platform. Was with a publisher before, who doesn't necessarily want this second book now. And I was saying, well, you'd be mad to put this out to a traditional publisher. You do all these events. You've got this YouTube channel. You've got quite a well-developed Patreon. This has to be in every form a self-published thing. The other thing is you've got a great voice. You're used to the audio world. You've got all sorts of options here. But this always was the case about indie authorship. It's like it becomes,
It is so important. I mean, I can think of someone like Adam Neville, who had 7 novels published by Pam Macmillan, and then decided that he wanted to go self-published. He already had a newsletter going out to 4,000 people, all of whom bought his next novel straight away. Self-published. He's got rights around the world. And that's exactly because he knows that he can only spend 50% of his time writing. The rest of it is about promotion and everything else related. So again, it's about the individual author, what works for them. Please, please, please don't think I can write the book and throw it out there. Too many people still think that. And too many people will sell fewer than that 200 copies, fewer than 100 copies in some cases.
Yeah. Well, look, drawing to a close, I just want to ask you, seeing as we're talking about all things new and an evolving market that's been, for more than 10 years now, a really exciting and dynamic space that has upended so much of the traditional publishing world and its, quick-footedness and its imagination and its openness and all the other things. Can I close just by asking you both, what's the next thing? Where are we going? What's going to be the thing? To you. What's going to make this conversation obsolete at this time of the conference next year?
Yes.
Exactly.
See, if I was your big sister and had to advise any author what the next thing was, I would say at the moment, and this will be different a year from now, but for the next year, I would be focusing as much as possible on book to film, book to streaming. The content absorption by audio and video companies that are looking to satisfy their viewers and their listeners, that the written word is not going anywhere. It is extremely popular. But if you're asking me what I think is really what the shift is, more and more books are being optioned. And not understanding that part of the market, you're leaving a large chunk of your future on the table, I believe. I hope that's not too offensive to those of you. Okay.
I work with a film and TV agent in Los Angeles at the Gotham Group. And because I'm not a specialist in that area, and as far as I'm concerned, I want to work with a specialist in that area. So we get many more interesting emails about options than we did 3 years ago. And the first thing I do is talk to Julie at the Gotham Group, and we talk through the possibilities and the different areas we can go to. I get a lot of emails from scouts, most of whom I know quite well over the years. And we talk about which of their clients might be interested in an individual thing. And again, whether it's streaming, whether it's film, whether it's mainstream TV, a lot more is on streaming now, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the coming things. And you're so right, in a year, things will be different. The great pleasure is that I can't tell you where it'll be in a year, because if I could, it would be bloody boring. This is great. It changes. It changes not because of us. It changes because of the market. And we're interested to see what that is.
Yeah. Well, look, John, Jarrold, Amy, Clark, thank you so much. It's been such a great session, such wonderful and really important information as well. I know for the people who'll be viewing this, we have a very strong connection with indie authors and the traditional publishing scene, and I just know that this session will be of huge benefit. So I'm very grateful to you both. Thanks very much.
Absolute pleasure.